turns on. We're going to get started, and as you can see, there's a room of folks over in Kelowna. We're trying to run this event in parallel. Some of them can wait below. We're going to be doing this a lot through the Climate Collective events. We're going to try to run things in parallel where it's physically possible, and so we'll be doing things like this a lot. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement, so I'm going to invite Robert over in the Okanagan to do it in Kelowna, and I think we might shut off for a second. Awesome. And so before we get started here today, I'm Simon Donner. I'm a prof. Oh, we got it.
He'll do his at the same time, so everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. Simon, we'll let him go.
Sorry, okay. Thank you very much. So I'm very pleased and excited today to launch this NUBC Climate Solutions Research Collective. And the collective acknowledges that here on the Okanagan, we are present on the traditional, unceded, and traditional lands of the Silex Okanagan people. We recognize, honor, and respect the Silex Okanagan peoples on the lands on which we live, work, and play. And stating this today on the eve of the Orange Shirt Day has additional significance. And as we commemorate the history and the legacy of residential schools, we're brought together here to forge a new path forwards. The collective is really about bringing together a diverse group of people, and we want to bring ideas, no solutions to a really pressing issue. And climate solutions that are just will require everyone's voices to be heard, including those who have been the shepherds of these lands long before settlers such as I have arrived. So thank you. I'll pass it back to Vancouver now.
Thanks so much, Robert, and thanks everyone in Kelowna. I want to acknowledge that we're here today, as we are every day on this campus, on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Musqueam people, and that these lands and waters have been a place of learning for the Musqueam for millennia, and they've passed on their culture, their history, their traditions from one generation to the next on this site where the university sits. And as Robert was alluding, our focus for today is climate change. That's what this collective and this initiative is about. And climate change confronts Indigenous peoples and cultures all across Canada, but really all across the world, from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people on whose land Vancouver resides, to the people of the Republic of Kiribati, where I have been privileged to do field work for a number of years, for about 20 years. It's in the Central Equatorial Pacific. And as I was thinking about this event and getting ready for today, I was thinking about how, somewhat to what Robert was saying, that much of the reason we're all here working on this challenge is about reconciling with historic wrongs of all forms. And those wrongs were committed here, but they're also committed in other parts of the world. And really we're sort of here to sort of try to, as much as we can, to correct those historic wrongs, but also to learn from one another in the process. So I hope we can start doing some of that, do some of that here today and as the year progresses. And so before I introduce a little bit more about the collective itself, I want to invite up Rachel Fernandez, who's the Associate Vice President in the Office of Research and Innovation.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, everybody in the room, and to our colleagues in Kelowna. It's really good to see everyone here. So I just want to say a few words about the Climate Solutions Research Collective. It is a new initiative that emerged in response to the university's Climate Emergency Declaration. So the declaration recognizes that addressing the climate crisis is critical to UBC's key functions of research, learning, and engagement. So climate science, including the research from the UBC community, has concluded that rapid and deep action is necessary to ensure that climate impacts are manageable and also to help communities around the world adapt. So in 2019, spurred by student advocacy, UBC declared a climate emergency in a statement championed by the President and endorsed unanimously by the Board of Governors. So this declaration recognized the severity and complexity of the climate crisis and recognized UBC's fundamental responsibility to foster a culture of engagement and advocacy on climate action. So in order to develop and implement the university's response to climate emergency, the UBC convened a climate emergency task force. So among the 9 strategic priorities identified by the task force was to expand, strengthen, and coordinate climate research at UBC. A primary recommendation coming from this and other priorities was to establish a body to expand, strengthen, and coordinate comprehensive cross-campus and interdisciplinary climate research. So our office, following guidance from a climate change research working group composed of representatives from multiple faculties across both UBC campuses, organized a 2-day virtual climate change research symposium. I think some of you may have attended that. So this symposium brought together climate researchers from across the institution, and it happened 2 years ago in October 2021. So the symposium was a first step to better connect UBC climate researchers and initiate a conversation about the next steps. So the symposium illustrated the breadth and diversity of students, faculty members, and programs working often disparately on different aspects of climate change solutions at UBC. So this is keenly demonstrated by the many climate-focused units present across the institution, which include the Center for Climate Justice, the Clean Energy Research Center, the Green Construction Research and Training Center at UBCO, the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability's multiple research groups, Psychology's Behavioral Sustainability Lab, the Center for Environmental Assessment Research's Adaptation Working Group, Forestry's Urban Nature Lab, the Okanagan Institute for Biodiversity, Resilience, and Ecosystem Services, Sauder School of Business's Center for Social Innovation and Impact, the School of Community and Regional Planning's Indigenous Planning Practicum and Housing Research Collaborative. These are just some of the many initiatives on our 2 campuses. So the event also revealed that most of the community wants to engage in research that can help BC, Canada, and the world address the climate emergency. And based on lessons from the symposium, the Climate Change Research Working Group was charged with brainstorming what type of body could facilitate and support new research connections and collaborations across students, faculty, and actually this led to the creation of this new collective. So the Climate Solutions Research Collective is supported initially for 2 years with funds from 11 different faculties across both UBC campuses. So 2 at UBC Okanagan and 9 at UBC Vancouver. And the VPRRI has provided matching funds for this. So the collective is charged with the goals of fostering engagement and improving connections between climate researchers, especially across disciplines and faculties. Also raising the external visibility of UBC's climate research and encouraging new collaborative research on climate change solutions. So this exciting new collective plans to hold and sponsor regular events, organize workshops to catalyze research, and sponsor cross-disciplinary student projects. So some of these initiatives are already underway. You may have heard of them. So this includes the Solutions Scholars Student Funding Program, which brings together graduate students and faculty members from across faculties and campuses to conduct research, helping to support the creation of new connections amongst climate researchers. So other activities are forthcoming with several planned over the course of this academic year. So with all of that, On behalf of Dr. Gail Murphy and everyone at VPRI, I really want to welcome Simon Donner, the Director of Climate Solutions, of the Climate Solutions Research Collective. Simon?
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. So, we're going to just, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about how this came to be, some of the thinking from folks on the steering committee, and what we're trying to accomplish with the collective. And then we're going to go into some interactive exercises. And before I get started, just a big shout out to Leslie Dampier, our collective's program coordinator, who's sitting up front here. And to Martin and Bashar, the undergraduate work learn students that are helping us out. Bashar is filming today. So thank you very much to Bashar. Listen, I mean, I don't need to tell anyone in this room, and certainly not anyone in Kelowna, that, about the everyday reality of climate change. Right? The planet's warming at any faster than at any point in the history of human civilization, and the planet's going to continue warming until we stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And people around the world have been experiencing the impacts of climate change every day. And we know this here in Canada, both in how we see smoke events, fire events, and all the impacts of these. This is Yellowknife. But it's happening, we're seeing these events around the world. This is the flooding in Greece this summer. This is from a heat wave in China. But we're also seeing the impacts of climate change in that as all the extremes are happening, as awareness is rising, we're taking action to respond, and we can see these things as well, these impacts as well. We see the drop in the price of solar and wind energy, and the increase in renewable energy usage around the world. We see the shift in the types of vehicles people are driving, right? And we also see the efforts to adapt to climate change, right? These should be these. This is the sandbagging that happens along Marine Drive, not that far from campus, right? That the city didn't used to do, but has now done in the winter to try to fight back against higher tides, right? And so climate change is an emergency. The university has declared a climate emergency, but it's an emergency not just because of all these impacts that we see here now. It's an emergency because the decisions that we make over the next few decades are going to determine the climate for many generations to come, right? I am a climate scientist. That's what my training was in originally. And what I think about a lot is the fact that the sum of the carbon dioxide we emit today will still be in the atmosphere 10,000 years from now, right? So that is what makes this an emergency. And so to put some of this into context and to put some of the challenge we have into context, I just want to show a little bit of data because, again, I am a scientist, and so I like to do that. This is global carbon dioxide emissions over time, going back just to the 1960s. And this is from fossil fuel burning, from cement production, and from land use change. And it's expressed in units of carbon. And you can see the increase over time. And then what I've done just straight out of data from the most recent IPCC synthesis report is just present what a trajectory would look like that would help us, give us a 2/3 chance to avoid 4 degrees of warming. And that trajectory would look like this. So that's for 4 degrees of warming. For 3 degrees of warming, the line's a little bit steeper. And well before I wanted to become a climate scientist, I thought of becoming a ski instructor. And so to use a snow sports analogy, I tend to think of these as sort of beginner and intermediate slopes, right? So a green diamond or a black square. They are more manager than the steeper slopes, but they're not good enough, right? We can't stick to the sort of bunny slopes if we want to avoid the more dangerous impacts of climate change that the world's governments have agreed we want to avoid. And so if we want a good chance of avoiding 2 degrees of warming, which is the upper limit in the Paris Agreement, we need to go down a steeper slope. It's more of a black diamond, right? And again, this is global data, but if we did this for Canada, it would look sort of similar. And if we want to avoid 1.5 degrees of warming, which is that lower limit in the Paris Climate Agreement that my friends and colleagues in the Pacific Islands fought very hard for, we're looking at a really steep, experts only, double black diamond. The 1.5 degree slope is so steep that many would argue it's impossible or dangerous to navigate at this point unless we invest in efforts to really pull a lot of carbon dioxide out of the air. And the danger with all of this is if we wait too long, you miss the turnoff to the next slope. So the 2 degree, if we keep delaying action, the 2 degree slope starts to look like the 1.5 degree slope. Right?
Recording in progress.
Okay. And the problem right now is that we are on the bunny slope. So things are happening, but we are on the bunny slope. So this funny little thing, triangle I'm about to show you, if it'll come up on the screen. There we go. This is from the recent global stocktake. So this is the projected emissions based on the nationally determined contributions. So this is the plans that governments send in as a part of the Paris Climate Agreement. This is the updated nationally determined contributions for 2030. And so if you take all of that into account and calculate what those emissions reductions are being promised would be, it is somewhere in that range. Right? And so this is in this global stocktake analysis that is being done in advance of COP28. It came out 2 weeks ago. And so this is where we get, if the world's governments follow through on the near-term pledges, right? It's not promised that we follow through on all of this. And so it just shows that we're on the bunny slopes. And I know that this looks like a complete abject failure, but we have at least gotten off the ski lift, because if we had not taken actions, this is some estimate from about 15 years ago I went back and looked at an International Energy Agency report for what they thought emissions were going to be back in 2010, projecting forward. And this is the projection going forward. And so it's just to tell you that there have been significant actions around the world, right? Shifts in thinking about where we're getting our energy, et cetera, shifts in forest management, et cetera. And so that we are not on the worst case trajectory that we possibly could have been on in the past. So we've gotten off the chairlift. The question now is, which run are we going to take down the mountain? And so what we really need right now is to be shifting from the kind of incremental actions that we're taking today, the things you do on a bunny slope. If you're a skier or a snowboarder, you don't have to be as cautious going down that slope. You can take your time turning, right? But if we want to make it and to avoid 2 degrees of warming, let's say, we need to go from incremental actions to really transformational ones, right? And I would say that the good news is that, most experts will tell you that the tools and the skills you need to be on the bunny slopes aren't that different from the ones that you need to be on the steep slopes, right? It's about your ability it's about the details, how you apply them, when you apply them, and everything. The risk, we have choices to make at this point. And so the risk, I think, at this point is we have to choose what run we want to take. And the run is not just about reducing emissions. That's not all this problem is, right? Because it's also about preparing for the impacts of climate change and for preparing for the impacts of the transition in energy sources and et cetera will have on the planet. Those steep slopes are risky, right? Anyone who skis knows this, right? Or a snowboarder knows this. If we're not careful about how you go down the run, the more reckless you are, the greater the upheaval there will be to people's ways of life, right? The greater potential risks to lives and livelihoods, to indigenous sovereignty, to energy access around the world, to cost of living, for sure, and possibly even to sort of the divisions that we see in society today, right? And so I think of this as a collective action problem. I think most people see climate change as a collective action problem. I think it's fair to say that this is probably the largest collective action problem in the history of humanity. Like, what else has there really been like this, where everyone needs to be involved? No individual, no community, no nation can solve this on its own. None of us here can solve it on its own, neither can the university as a whole. But on the flip side, it means that everybody needs to contribute. It not only needs to contribute, but that everybody, regardless of your field, regardless of your line of work, regardless of your culture or your background, you have a way that you can contribute. The coordination, of course, is going to be hard. This is a struggle we see even just within UBC, as Rachel was mentioning to us before. There are so many of us here on campus thinking about climate change, working on different aspects of the problem, and doing so often in quite complementary ways. But it's not that easy to coordinate. There's a lot of us. This is a big campus, and in fact, there's 2 campuses. And we don't even talk to each other across the 2 campuses that often. And so the question is, what could we do a little differently if we had some coordination, basically? And that's the goal of the collective, right? The Climate Solutions Research Collective is not intended to compete with or to replace any existing climate initiatives on campus. That's not the point at all. This isn't a research cluster. Right? It's also not a research center. There's a reason it has the word collective. Collective doesn't have any like legal meaning at UBC. Right? It's also a good word for the problem, right? Collective action problem. The idea here is to be more of a web, more of a network that overlays what's happening around campus, a way for people to connect to and engage, and a way to identify and fill gaps in climate work. By connecting with each other more, we might identify things that folks at UBC could be working on that aren't. Challenges are out there in the world. And so our goal is for all of you to make connections and to kind of spur more solutions-driven research that will help us respond to the climate crisis. Now, I'm not going to define climate solutions for you. The steering committee and I, we've talked about this, and the decision was that we don't feel like a small group of people should decide what climate solutions are, because really this problem is enormous and it's global, and there's so many different things out there can classify as solutions. And so we think that the community should decide what a solution is. It's not for anyone to determine that one thing. And so we do have a steering committee of people composed of folks from across disciplines. And the way this is constructed is one person from each faculty that is providing funding on campus. The nine faculties here at UBC and 2 faculties over at UBC Vancouver, and the 2 faculties over at UBC Okanagan. But I want to be clear that there is some arbitrariness to those of us that are involved in this initiative. It came out of the Climate Change Research Symposium. There was a panel of people put together to try to put the symposium together. So the team of folks on the steering committee was mostly from that. It's not exactly from that because of the complication of which faculties provided money, and we need to have the proper representation. So it was a little bit complicated for this to come together. But the thing to note is that we're not the collective. You're the collective. We're the group of people that are more or less volunteering our time to just do the coordination and get events together and organize things and whatnot. But I don't want you to think that you're not a member because you're not on the committee. Everybody who wants to be is part of this. We're just coordinating, right? And so Rachel gave us an introduction to the objectives of the collective. I'm going to review them again really quickly. The first thing is we really want to be sort of fostering engagement around campus, right? That's the point of this. And so we're going to try to do this through programming. I'll introduce some of it in a few minutes. One of the things this includes, this is a request from the university, was developing like a kind of Find a Climate Researcher webpage, kind of similar to the COVID webpage that UBC had. But what we're thinking in doing this is making it really granular. I've had a lot of talks with folks off campus. I was at this entrepreneurship immersion week downtown that UBC runs, UBC Vancouver runs every year. And what was clear from there's a lot of people that would love to have a really easy way to look up in pretty explicit detail who's an expert on this exact piece of sort of climate solutions work. So we're going to work on that in addition to all the programming. We're looking to encourage collaborations, right? And the focus is interdisciplinary collaborations. This is going to wrapping around all of the 2 campuses, and that it's not restricted to just British Columbia or Vancouver or Kelowna problems. We want to make sure we're thinking about, we're a large research institution in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We want to figure out how much we can contribute beyond our jurisdictions as well as within them, within our own communities. And also we're going to be doing a lot to support students and faculty, and the Solution Scholars Program will tell you a little bit more about that. This is going to include, starting more next semester, workshops to help people connect, write grants, connect with off-campus partners, etc., and using all of that to try to raise the general awareness of UBC climate research in all of its different forms. And so the key to this really all is engagement. In terms of programming, went too far. In terms of programming, here are the main things that we have planned at this point. So there's the Solution Scholars Program. I think a lot of you are already aware of this, and so this was announced this summer, right after our funding came in on July 1st. We launched the program. And so there are 10 fantastic students, 8 from UBC Vancouver, 2 from UBC Okanagan, graduate students from a whole range of different faculties that are working on a research problem that's connected to, but maybe not exactly their thesis. So sort of taking a piece of the work they're doing and trying to make it a little bit more solutions focused. And the goal is that they're doing so with their graduate advisor, but also with somebody elsewhere on one of the two campuses that is from a different discipline. They can be from the same faculty because our faculties can be so diverse, right? But from different disciplines to try to begin this experiment of trying to expand engagement happening at UBC. And so this has just started, the Solution Scholars and Leslie and I just started meeting recently. And so this year we have two focal areas in the program, and I think most of you have already heard about this. One of them is extreme heat and or wildfires. The other one is urban transformations. This is not to say, again, that these are the only areas in which the collective will work. It was just felt that in year one, we wanted to make sure that there was enough glue and overlap between the students. We didn't want to leave it open to any piece of climate work out there. So there was some restriction in year one, and it's still kind of open for discussion how this happens in the second year. And so you're going to meet the Solution Scholars a little bit later, once we go into the breakout conversations. The other things we're going to be doing is we're going to be holding seminars, the research workshops I mentioned. The seminars, we're aiming for a slightly different approach. There'll be some of the cases where there's an invited speaker coming in or somebody from UBC that gives a talk about their work, right? Where the typical kind of 40-minute colloquium followed by questions. But we're aiming really to try to make things interactive, to bring in, instead of a seminar focused on somebody's work, a seminar focused on a question, and then we bring in folks from across campus or across one of the two campuses to give a different perspective on how you might answer that question and try to get people engaged during the event and after the event. So we're thinking about that for seminars, research workshops, as I mentioned. We're also going to be having a lot of more informal get-togethers, brown bags, and informal events, and I'll talk about those in a second. And at the end of the academic year, we're going to have a Solutions Summit where all of the Solutions Scholars are going to present the outcome of their work. Their projects won't be completely finished at that point, but they'll be on the way, and so we'll have a public-facing event to sort of highlight the work being done by the Solutions Scholars. The events, as I mentioned, are going to be in a mix of formats. Some of them are going to be like this, where we try to run them in parallel with the other campus. Sometimes it'll be launched from UBCO, sometimes it'll be launched from here. But we'll also do some purely virtual events and some purely hybrid events, and probably some separate events. We're still trying to figure out what is the best coordination to get people engaged. But one thing I want you to notice is that we are trying as much as possible to have events that are physically in person, because as much as we can do with online events, as much as you can bring a lot of people in, the engagement when you're trying to create new projects in person is is really powerful. So we're going to try to do a lot of stuff as person as possible because we want to establish connections. To give you an example of some of our events, some of the things we have coming up, for example, next Friday, we're going to just be doing our first of sort of the informal brown bag type workshops with the Solution Scholars. And this is on, how do you give a short presentation about your research that's understandable to a wider audience that's interested in climate change. We're doing this because the Solution Scholars in the weeks after that are going to be talking about their work to a wider audience. So events like this, we're designing them around the scholars, and the scholars are all going to be attending them, but they are open to anybody. And I encourage graduate students, in particular across campus, if you're interested in climate work, particularly if you're interested in these subjects we're going to be hearing about, come to the events. Just because you're not officially a Solution Scholar doesn't mean you're not part of the program. We want everyone to feel that they are a part of the collective. So we have some of these coming up, and then in October, and then in November, we're co-hosting a seminar with IRES where Jonathan Foley, who's the director of Project Drawdown, very well-known climate solutions organization, is going to be up here and is going to talk to us. Ooh, we get a little fast. We have a couple more brown bags coming up, and then we're organizing a big event before COP28 where we're going to have a panel of people talk about what are the 5 big things that are being negotiated at COP28. And let's have somebody who really knows each one of them describe what they are and have opportunity for discussion. And so the last thing really just to say today is we're going to go off from here after this intro. We're going to break off into groups. We're going to do it separately between the two campuses just to control some of the potential chaos. We're going to present you some questions and to get your feedback on what are the sorts of events you want us to focus on, what are some of the subject matters you want us to focus on, etc. And we're also we're going to be doing this via Slido. Also via Slido, if you have questions just about the collective and how it operates or something you'd like to suggest, absolutely, throw it on the Slido or come up and talk to me or one of the members of the steering committee who are spread out around the tables at the event here. And if I have one goal from those of us on the steering committee for all of you here, it's the goal of this whole thing is supposed to be engagement. And so if you go home from today or go back to your office from today with having met one person at your table or at another table, that you're like, I'd like to have a follow-up conversation with them, I haven't seen them in a long time or never met them before, then this is a success, because that's the goal we're aiming for with this initiative.